Welcome to another episode of Workplace Drama Meets Marriage Meltdown. I'm Truck Smith, 46, married to Sharon, 12 years in small-town West Virginia. I'm about to tell you how my cheating wife and clueless boss thought they could outsmart an engineer. Spoiler alert, they couldn't even outsmart a garage door opener. Picture this, a small West Virginia town where everyone knows everyone's business, except apparently I didn't know my own wife was conducting business meetings with my boss in our bedroom. Wait until you see how I used my own surveillance cameras against them. But here's the kicker, they weren't just stealing my marriage, they were after something worth millions. Now let me introduce you to the players in this mess. Meet the players in this small-town soap opera. First up is Truck Smith, 46 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, living in small-town West Virginia for 12 years. The man speaks about his own life with the emotional range of a technical manual, which probably explains why he missed every single red flag his wife was waving around like a matador. While everyone else gossips and schemes upstairs, Truck spends his evenings in the basement working on surgical tool pats that will eventually be worth millions. Truck and Sharon rent this modest 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage. The house itself screams middle-class mediocrity, the kind of place where neighbors peek through curtains and everyone knows when you get a new car before you do. That basement workshop becomes Truck's sanctuary, the one place where his engineering mind can actually create something valuable without interference. Then we have Sharon, the wife who somehow managed to climb the corporate ladder higher than her engineer husband. She's production manager making more than me. She works at the same company where Truck designs surgical equipment, and she treats this fact like she won the lottery while Truck bought a losing scratch-off ticket. She carries herself around town like she's doing everyone a favor just by existing, especially her husband. The production manager title sounds impressive until you realize Sharon basically babysits assembly line workers and fills out spreadsheets all day. But in a small West Virginia town, being a manager at the local medical supply company makes you practically royalty. Sharon walks around like she invented the concept of workplace leadership, when really she just tells people when to take their lunch breaks. Enter Jim, the sales manager and Truck's boss, who represents everything wrong with corporate America crammed into one incompetent package. Jim thinks managing engineers means hovering over their shoulders and asking stupid questions about technical processes he couldn't understand if his life depended on it. Picture that guy in every office who got promoted because he talks loud and wears expensive ties, not because he knows anything useful. The beautiful irony is that Jim manages the sales department, but spends most of his time bothering the engineering team. He's the type who probably thinks engineers are just really expensive technicians, and that his business degree from some regional college makes him qualified to judge surgical equipment design. Jim treats technical expertise like it's optional, which explains why he later thinks he can just steal Truck's million-dollar ideas and somehow make them work. Now here's where things get interesting about Sharon's motivations. Why would a woman who clearly thinks she's better than her husband marry him in the first place? In small towns like theirs, eligible bachelors are about as rare as parking spaces at Walmart on Black Friday. Truck had a steady engineering job, owned his own tools, and probably seemed like a safe bet for someone looking to upgrade their life situation. Sharon likely saw him as her ticket to middle-class respectability, not realizing she'd eventually want to trade up again. West Virginia's small-town dynamics add another layer of comedy to this situation. Everyone knows everyone's business, which means Sharon and Jim's affair is probably the worst-kept secret since the town's last mayor tried to hide his gambling problem. In places like this, gossip travels faster than internet rumors, and somehow Truck is the only person who doesn't know his wife is stepping out. The workplace love triangle gets even messier when you consider the office hierarchy. Jim technically outranks both Truck and Sharon, but Sharon makes more money than Truck, and Truck actually knows how to do his job while Jim just pretends to understand what everyone else is doing. It's like a corporate soap opera where nobody deserves their position and everyone's sleeping with the wrong person. The company already rejected Truck's surgical tool ideas with a memo threatening to fire him if he works on them during office hours, which is corporate stupidity at its finest. They're basically telling their engineer not to innovate on company time, then acting surprised when he innovates on his own time and keeps the profits. Those surgical tools represent everything Truck does well: precision, innovation, and problem-solving. While upstairs his marriage falls apart because he can't solve the one puzzle that really matters. The prenup situation reveals how Sharon's family viewed this marriage from day one. Her mother and sister treated Truck like some kind of gold digger, which is hilarious considering Sharon was the one marrying up economically. They insisted on a prenuptial agreement stating that cheaters only leave with what they brought to the marriage, apparently not trusting their own daughter to stay faithful. Sharon's mom Jean and sister Joan function like a Greek chorus of terrible advice, constantly hanging around the house or dragging Sharon to local bars for strategy sessions. These women treat marriage like a business transaction that needs constant renegotiation, and they've apparently decided Truck isn't holding up his end of some unspoken bargain. They operate with the subtlety of a marching band, having conversations on speakerphone like they want Truck to overhear their scheming. What makes this whole setup perfectly ridiculous is that Truck approaches his failing marriage with the same methodical thinking he uses for engineering problems, except human relationships don't follow technical specifications. Meanwhile, Sharon and Jim think they're masterminding some brilliant scheme to steal millions from the basement inventor, not realizing they're dealing with someone who designs life-saving medical equipment for a living. The stage is set for a battle between people who think they're clever and someone who actually knows how to solve complex problems. Sharon married what she thought was a predictable engineer, but she's about to discover that the quiet guy in the basement has been playing a completely different game all along. But how did Sharon and Jim sneak cameras into my own basement? Stay tuned. Speaking of Jim, you really have to wonder what kind of delusion makes someone think they can outsmart an engineer when they can barely manage their own department. The boss from hell who thinks he's Steve Jobs. Jim operates under the assumption that management means standing over people's shoulders asking questions that prove he understands absolutely nothing about the work being done. He treats engineering like it's some mysterious black magic that he can control through sheer force of corporate authority, which is about as effective as trying to fix a computer by yelling at it. The man has turned micromanagement into an art form, except instead of creating something beautiful, he produces daily headaches for everyone unfortunate enough to work under him. Jim schedules unnecessary meetings to discuss projects he can't comprehend, then interrupts those meetings to take phone calls about completely unrelated sales targets. He asks Truck to explain surgical tool specifications in simple terms, then immediately forgets everything and asks the same questions the next day. What makes Jim's behavior even more ridiculous is his obsession with tracking Truck's working hours, despite the fact that Truck earns a salary. Jim maintains detailed spreadsheets documenting when Truck arrives, when he takes lunch, and when he leaves, as if engineering work follows the same schedule as a factory assembly line. He actually printed out time cards for a salaried employee, which demonstrates the kind of corporate stupidity that makes you question how these companies stay in business. The man treats innovation like it operates on a punch clock, completely missing the point that creative problem-solving doesn't happen between 9 and 5. Jim approaches surgical tool design with the confidence of someone who thinks all medical equipment works like the blood pressure cuffs at pharmacy checkout counters. He once recommended making surgical scissors more colorful because he thought doctors would prefer bright handles, which shows about as much medical knowledge as suggesting stethoscopes should play music. He treats life-saving medical devices like they're kitchen gadgets that just need better marketing. The growing tension around Jim's incompetence becomes more obvious when you realize he's actively working to undermine Truck's contributions to the company. Jim tells the company owners that Truck's innovative ideas are worthless, while simultaneously pumping Truck for detailed information about those same projects. He schedules private meetings with Truck to discuss productivity concerns, but spends most of the time asking specific technical questions about the surgical tool patents. Jim pretends these conversations are about performance improvement, when really he's conducting intelligence-gathering missions disguised as employee reviews. The power dynamic between Jim and Truck reveals everything you need to know about insecure managers who feel threatened by actual expertise. Jim can't do Truck's job, doesn't understand Truck's work, and needs to assert authority through petty control measures because he can't demonstrate superior knowledge or skills. He interrupts Truck's technical explanations during team meetings, dismisses engineering concerns as overthinking, and generally treats specialized knowledge like it's showing off rather than job competency. Jim's growing interest in Truck's personal life starts subtly, but becomes increasingly obvious as he begins asking intrusive questions about home projects and family finances. During casual conversations, Jim steers discussions toward Truck's basement workshop, asking about equipment purchases and project timelines with the fake enthusiasm of someone pretending to be supportive. He offers unsolicited advice about work-life balance while fishing for information about when Truck works on patents at home. Jim even suggests team-building activities that would give him access to Truck's house, like backyard barbecues or garage workshop tour. The surveillance becomes more sophisticated as Jim starts coordinating his questions with Sharon's conversations at home. When Truck mentions progress on a particular surgical tool design, Jim somehow knows to ask follow-up questions the next day that demonstrate inside knowledge about the project. Jim begins scheduling meetings that conflict with Truck's usual basement workshop time, then acts concerned when Truck mentions working late to compensate. He offers to help Truck organize his home office, volunteers to recommend security systems for protecting valuable prototypes, and generally inserts himself into conversations about Truck's intellectual property with suspicious enthusiasm. Jim's real motivations become clearer when you connect his professional sabotage with his personal infiltration of Truck's marriage. The memo threatening to fire Truck for working on surgical tool pats during company time serves multiple purposes beyond simple workplace control. It creates legal documentation that the company rejected Truck's ideas, which could later support claims that any resulting patents belong to whoever develops them further. Jim positions himself as the reasonable manager trying to keep Truck focused on assigned duties, while secretly gathering information to steal those same rejected innovations. The corporate memo warning Truck not to work on patents during work hours becomes Jim's masterstroke of manipulation. By officially rejecting Truck's ideas, Jim creates the perfect legal cover for later theft while forcing Truck to develop the patents at home where Sharon has unlimited access. He transforms legitimate workplace policies into weapons for personal enrichment, which requires a special kind of calculated evil. Jim's micromanagement strategy reveals itself as elaborate reconnaissance disguised as incompetent supervision. Every irritating question about technical specifications, every unnecessary meeting about project timelines, every intrusive inquiry about home workshop activities serves the dual purpose of gathering intelligence while maintaining plausible deniability. Jim can always claim he was just doing his job as a manager, even though his real job involves planning to steal millions from his subordinate. The beautiful irony is that Jim's obvious incompetence as a sales manager actually makes him more effective as a corporate spy, because nobody expects someone so professionally clueless to be capable of sophisticated deception. His bumbling questions and persistent oversight look like typical bad management rather than coordinated theft preparation, which gives him perfect cover for gathering the information he needs to steal Truck's life work. But while Jim was busy playing corporate mastermind at the office, much more obvious signs of betrayal were happening right under Truck's nose at home. Red flags everywhere, but I'm colorblind apparently. Sharon's sudden transformation from wife to distant roommate should have triggered every alarm bell in my engineer brain, but trust makes you incredibly stupid about obvious patterns. When someone's been your partner for 12 years, you develop this automatic assumption that their behavior makes sense, even when it stopped making sense months ago. The physical intimacy situation became so bad it was almost impressive in its completeness. We went from normal married couple routine to something that resembled two polite strangers who occasionally shared meals. Sharon and I used to have closeness about 3 or 4 times a week. Nothing extraordinary since she isn't really into trying new things, but then she completely shut down that aspect of our relationship like someone flipped a switch. For the past year, she hasn't even given me a kiss, which means Sharon couldn't manage basic affectionate gestures that most people give their pets. The woman stopped providing the minimum level of physical contact that distinguishes a marriage from a business partnership. Yet somehow I interpreted this as a temporary phase rather than a massive relationship emergency. Sharon's general disinterest expanded beyond physical intimacy into every aspect of our shared life together. She stopped asking about my work projects, showed no curiosity about my basement workshop activities, and generally treated me like background furniture that occasionally required feeding. Sharon developed this habit of looking through me during conversations, responding to my comments with non-committal sounds that suggested she was mentally calculating grocery lists or planning weekend activities that didn't include me. The dinner table conversations became exercises in polite disengagement where Sharon would ask perfunctory questions about my day, then immediately lose focus when I started answering. She stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped sharing details about her own work experiences, and generally created this atmosphere where I felt like I was bothering her just by existing in our shared space. Sharon treated our marriage like a chore that she completed efficiently, but without enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Sharon's family transformed from occasional visitors into a permanent advisory committee dedicated to solving the truck problem. Her mother Jean and sister Joan started showing up at the house with increasing frequency, always carrying themselves like they were attending important strategy meetings rather than casual family visits. These women would arrive with serious expressions and immediately begin having intense conversations that stopped abruptly whenever I entered the room. The family conspiracy aspect reached levels of obviousness that would embarrass amateur theater performers. Jean and Joan would schedule their visits during times when I was supposed to be working in my basement, then act surprised when I emerged earlier than expected. They brought legal documents to family dinners, discussed property values during casual conversations, and generally behaved like divorce attorneys conducting client consultations in my living room. What made their scheming particularly ridiculous was their complete lack of subtlety about conducting these conversations on speakerphone. Jean and Joan would call Sharon while I was in the house, then proceed to discuss strategies for kicking me out, stealing my money, or just humiliating me in general, with the volume turned up like they wanted me to overhear their planning sessions. These women apparently believed that putting conversations on speaker somehow made them more secret, when really it just broadcast their intentions to anyone within a 50-foot radius. I started approaching this situation with the same systematic thinking I applied to engineering problems, which meant analyzing behavioral patterns and looking for logical explanations. I began documenting Sharon's schedule changes, noting when she worked late without advance notice, and tracking the correlation between family visits and Sharon's mood improvements. I created mental spreadsheets of my wife's behavior like I was troubleshooting a malfunctioning piece of equipment, which probably explains why I took so long to reach obvious conclusions. The engineering mindset that made me excellent at solving technical problems actually worked against me when dealing with human deception. I kept looking for rational explanations for Sharon's behavior changes, assuming that her disengagement must be related to work stress, family pressures, or temporary personal issues that would resolve themselves with time and patience. I treated our marriage like a complex system that just needed proper maintenance rather than recognizing that someone was actively sabotaging the entire operation. My growing paranoia manifested in hyperanalysis of everyday interactions, where I would replay conversations looking for hidden meanings and examine Sharon's facial expressions for signs of deception. I started paying attention to details that had previously seemed insignificant, like Sharon's phone habits, her clothing choices for work, and her sudden interest in personal grooming that didn't seem intended for my benefit. I began collecting evidence of behavioral changes without fully understanding what that evidence might prove. The workplace dynamic between Sharon and Jim became increasingly awkward once I started actually paying attention to their interactions during company meetings and office events. Sharon and Jim had developed this pattern of brief, intense conversations that stopped immediately when other people approached, along with an unusual familiarity that seemed inappropriate for their professional relationship. They shared inside jokes during team meetings, exchanged meaningful looks when discussing project timelines, and generally behaved like people who spent significant time together outside of work. Jim started asking detailed questions about Sharon's opinions during meetings, deferring to her judgment in ways that seemed designed to impress her rather than improve business outcomes. Sharon would defend Jim's obviously bad management decisions with enthusiasm that she never showed for my actual expertise, creating this bizarre dynamic where she supported her boss's incompetence while dismissing her husband's professional accomplishments. Office events became exercises in watching Sharon and Jim navigate around each other with the careful choreography of people trying not to reveal their secret relationship. They would arrive separately but somehow end up in extended conversations, leave at different times but both disappear for similar durations, and generally coordinate their movements in ways that suggested significant advance planning. I started noticing that Sharon's work schedule changes often coincided with Jim's mysterious afternoon meetings, that her mood improvements happened after days when Jim seemed particularly pleased with himself, and that her renewed interest in workplace social events correlated perfectly with Jim's attendance at those same functions. The most obvious signs of infidelity become invisible when you trust someone completely. My engineering background taught me to assume that complex systems operate according to logical principles, but human deception operates according to completely different rules that don't respond to rational analysis or patient troubleshooting. I knew something was off, but the truth blew my mind. What I didn't realize was that while I was busy analyzing my failing marriage, I was sitting on something worth millions that everyone else thought was complete garbage. Million-dollar basement inventor versus corporate idiots. The surgical tools I developed in my basement represent the kind of medical innovations that make doctors excited and hospital administrators start calculating profit margins. These aren't simple instruments like the basic surgical kits I designed for work. We're talking about specialized tools that solve specific medical problems with elegant engineering solutions. Think of surgical instruments that make complex procedures easier, reduce patient recovery time, or allow doctors to perform operations with greater precision. The medical device industry thrives on these kinds of incremental improvements that save lives while generating substantial revenue for patent holders. The beautiful irony is that I developed these innovations using the same engineering skills my company pays me to use on much simpler projects. My employer basically trains me to solve medical equipment problems 8 hours a day, then acts shocked when I apply those skills to create more sophisticated solutions during my personal time. The company treats innovation like it only counts when it happens within their predetermined boundaries, completely missing the connection between employee expertise and independent invention. When I initially presented my surgical tool concepts to company leadership, their response demonstrated the kind of corporate short-sightedness that makes business schools create entire courses about missed opportunities. The company showed zero interest in ideas that would later be worth millions, apparently because the innovations didn't fit their existing product lines or market strategies. Corporate executives probably looked at my detailed technical specifications and saw complicated manufacturing challenges rather than revolutionary medical devices that could dominate specialized markets. The company's rejection becomes even more ridiculous when you consider that they employ me specifically because of my engineering expertise in medical device design. These people pay me to understand surgical equipment, then dismiss my surgical equipment innovations as worthless. The decision-makers probably held meetings where they concluded that if my ideas were actually valuable, some other company would have already developed them. This represents the classic corporate mentality that assumes innovation only happens in research departments with massive budgets and formal approval processes. The company sent a memo forbidding patent work on company time, threatening to fire me if I continued developing my surgical tool ideas during work hours. Apparently, they believe that creativity operates like a light switch that employees can turn off when they clock in each morning, because nothing says we value innovation quite like threatening to fire your engineer for being too innovative. This corporate policy forced me to move my patent development work to my basement workshop, which inadvertently gave Sharon unlimited access to million-dollar intellectual property while eliminating their own oversight of the development process. My basement workshop transformed from a hobby space into a high-tech development laboratory filled with precision tools, technical manuals, and prototype surgical instruments. Engineers approach personal projects with the same methodical intensity they bring to professional work, except without the corporate bureaucracy that usually slows down innovation. The basement represents everything good about engineering culture, problem-solving, attention to detail, and relentless improvement of existing solutions. The workshop setup includes specialized measuring equipment, computer-aided design software, and prototype manufacturing tools that allow me to test my surgical instrument concepts before filing patent applications. Engineers love having complete control over their work environment, which means the basement became more organized and better equipped than my actual office. This personal laboratory gives me the freedom to experiment with ideas that my employer considers too risky or impractical for commercial development. Companies consistently demonstrate this remarkable ability to create their own worst-case scenarios through terrible decision-making. They reject valuable innovations, force employees to develop those innovations independently, then act surprised when those employees leave to start competing companies or sell patents to competitors. The surgical tool situation represents corporate stupidity at its most self-destructive, where management decisions actively create the conditions for employee betrayal and intellectual property theft. The company's rejection letter becomes the most important document in this entire saga, because it legally establishes that my surgical tool patents belong exclusively to me rather than my employer. Corporate lawyers probably thought they were protecting company interests by documenting their lack of interest in my ideas, not realizing they were creating ironclad legal protection for my intellectual property rights. The memo that was supposed to discourage innovation actually becomes the foundation for my legal victory. Sharon and Jim's plan to steal these valuable patents represents the kind of scheme that requires both access and expertise. Sharon provides the access through her marriage, while Jim contributes his complete lack of ethics and his position within the company. They probably assume that stealing intellectual property from a basement workshop will be easier than corporate espionage, not realizing that my engineering background makes me naturally suspicious of security vulnerabilities. This situation perfectly illustrates how corporate arrogance creates opportunities for employee revenge. The same company that rejected million-dollar innovations and threat to fire their inventor for being too creative later discovers that those rejected ideas generate enough revenue to destroy their entire business model. Sometimes the best revenge against corporate stupidity is simply being right about everything they said was wrong. What I didn't expect was that my own basement would become the stage for an elaborate surveillance operation that would make professional spies laugh at the amateur hour tactics being deployed under my own roof. Spy vs. Spy, the surveillance camera comedy show. Nothing says healthy marriage quite like discovering you and your spouse are running competing surveillance operations in the same house. The basement workspace that was supposed to be my private sanctuary suddenly became ground zero for the world's most amateur espionage operation. My discovery of the cameras in my workspace happens exactly like you'd expect from someone who approaches problems with engineering precision. I noticed unfamiliar wires that didn't belong with my surgical tool prototypes and spotted odd camera placement angles that seemed designed to capture my work area. The man probably spent more time analyzing these installations than most people spend planning their vacations. I approached surveillance detection like troubleshooting a malfunctioning piece of equipment, methodically checking every corner of my workspace until I identified the foreign technology that didn't belong in my organized basement laboratory. The cameras themselves represented amateur hour spy tactics at their finest. Someone installed surveillance equipment without considering that engineers naturally notice when their workspaces get modified without permission. The installation probably required multiple visits to my basement, which means Sharon was conducting reconnaissance missions in her own house while pretending to do laundry or organize storage boxes. My decision to install counter-surveillance represented the moment when I stopped being a passive victim and started fighting back with the same methodical approach I use for everything else. I went out and purchased cheap cameras like I was buying supplies for a weekend DIY project, probably comparing features and reading online reviews before making my surveillance equipment selections. I treated spy camera shopping with the same careful consideration other people use for major appliance purchases. The beautiful irony of this whole surveillance war is that an engineer who designs precision medical instruments got out-teched by his cheating wife and a sales manager who can barely operate his office computer. I spend my professional life creating sophisticated surgical tools that require exact specifications and flawless performance, yet somehow Sharon and Jim managed to install spy equipment in my workspace without me noticing for weeks. Jim's involvement in the surveillance operation revealed depths of incompetence that almost deserved recognition. The same man who can't understand basic engineering concepts somehow coordinated a home invasion spy mission with enough technical skill to install hidden cameras. The fact that this corporate buffoon successfully infiltrated my basement workshop represented either beginner's luck or the kind of focused competence that Jim never demonstrates at his actual job. Once I started gathering my own surveillance evidence, the recorded phone conversations between Sharon and Jim provided entertainment that surpassed most reality television programming. These two conducted their affair planning with all the subtlety of radio announcers, apparently assuming that private conversations stay private even when they're discussing criminal conspiracies at full volume. The family speakerphone conversations reached levels of obviousness that would embarrass amateur theater performers. Jean and Joan conducted their strategy sessions with Sharon like they were hosting a radio call-in show about marriage destruction, apparently believing that putting conversations on speaker somehow made them more private rather than broadcasting their schemes to anyone within hearing range. These women discussed plans for kicking me out, stealing my money, or just humiliating me in general, with the same casual tone other families use for vacation planning. My evidence collection process transformed me from passive surveillance target into amateur documentary filmmaker, carefully cataloging the destruction of my marriage with the same attention to detail I apply to surgical tool specifications. I probably organized my spy footage with the same systematic approach I use for engineering project files, creating detailed records of infidelity and conspiracy planning that would impress professional investigators. The growing collection of surveillance footage created this bizarre situation where I knew more about Sharon's relationship with Jim than either of them realized. I became an unwilling expert on their affair dynamics, listening to intimate conversations and watching romantic interactions that revealed how different Sharon acted with her lover compared to her husband. My camera placement strategy expanded beyond the basement workspace into bedrooms, kitchen areas, and living spaces, where the conspiracy unfolded during supposedly private family moments. I probably spent considerable time planning optimal camera angles and audio capture positions, applying engineering problem-solving skills to maximize surveillance effectiveness. The technical challenge of documenting infidelity became another project that I approached with methodical precision. The surveillance equipment sat quietly recording while Sharon and Jim conducted their affair and planned their patent theft, completely unaware that their victim was gathering evidence of everything they thought they were hiding. Every intimate moment and criminal conversation got preserved as digital evidence that would later destroy their lives with mathematical precision. The Footage eventually captured conversations revealing Sharon's true feelings about me, where she discussed me like I was unpaid household help rather than her marriage partner. These recordings showed the complete contempt Sharon felt for her husband, treating me as someone who existed solely to provide financial support and perform yard maintenance while she pursued her real romantic interests elsewhere. What made this surveillance war particularly effective was that Sharon and Jim assumed they were dealing with someone too trusting and oblivious to fight back effectively. They conducted their scheming with the confidence of people who believed their deception skills exceeded their actual capabilities, completely oblivious to the possibility that someone might be recording their criminal admissions. The recordings captured far more than simple adultery evidence. They documented detailed discussions about stealing my surgical tool patents, complete with specific strategies for accessing my basement workshop and copying my technical specifications. Sharon and Jim coordinated their patent theft planning like they were organizing a surprise birthday party, discussing criminal conspiracies with the same casual enthusiasm other couples use for vacation planning. But what the bedroom cameras captured went far beyond anything I expected to discover about my marriage. The bedroom Olympics I wasn't invited to. The recordings showed Sharon displaying enthusiasm and genuine affection with Jim that she hadn't shown me in years. She laughed at Jim's stupid jokes with authentic amusement, initiated physical contact with eager anticipation, and generally behaved like someone who actually enjoyed being intimate with her partner. The contrast was so stark that I probably wondered if I was watching footage of my wife's identical twin sister, except this energetic, passionate woman was definitely the same person who treated me like an annoying maintenance worker who occasionally required polite acknowledgement. I felt like I'd been erased. Watching Sharon demonstrate genuine sexual enthusiasm with Jim, while remembering her complete lack of interest in our own marriage, created the kind of psychological damage that makes people question everything they thought they knew about themselves. I had spent months wondering if Sharon's coldness resulted from work stress, family pressure, or some personal issue I could help resolve. The recordings revealed that Sharon's problem wasn't with intimacy in general, her problem was specifically with me. Their pillow talk sessions provided entertainment that surpassed anything reality television could produce, except the criminals planning to steal millions were using my own bedroom for their strategic planning meetings. Sharon and Jim would finish their romantic activities, then immediately transition into detailed discussions about patent theft like they were conducting board meetings between bedsheets. These two approached post-coital criminal conspiracy with the same casual attitude other couples use for planning weekend grocery shopping trips. Jim would ask specific technical questions about my surgical tool designs, while Sharon provided insider information about development timelines and prototype testing schedules. The bedroom footage captured them plotting patent theft with discussions about profit splits and detailed timelines for accessing my basement workshop. They coordinated their theft strategy with the relaxed confidence of people discussing vacation itineraries, apparently believing that stealing intellectual property worth millions was just another weekend project they could complete together. Sharon supplied detailed information about my work habits, basement workshop security, and patent application progress like she was briefing a corporate spy about infiltrating competitor facilities. The family affair revelation transformed this story from simple adultery into something resembling a twisted soap opera where everyone participates in betraying the main character. Sharon wasn't just cheating with Jim, her mother Jean and sister Joan were also involved in affairs that created this bizarre extended family conspiracy against my existence. The recordings revealed conversations where these women discussed their various romantic partners while coordinating plans to destroy my financial security and emotional well-being. Small-town scandal dynamics reach entirely new levels when multiple family members conduct simultaneous affairs while plotting to steal millions from their victim's basement workshop. Jean and Joan treated their involvement like participating in some kind of community improvement project, except instead of organizing charity fundraisers, they were organizing the systematic destruction of their daughter's marriage for personal profit. These women approached adultery and theft like team sports where everyone gets to participate and share the eventual rewards. Sharon's genuine contempt for me became crystal clear through private conversations, where she described me with the same affection most people reserve for discussing household appliances that need frequent repairs. She told Jim that I only existed to provide financial support and perform yard maintenance, treating her husband like unpaid help who occasionally required feeding and basic acknowledgement. Sharon discussed my personality, work habits, and personal interests with the dismissive tone people use when complaining about incompetent service providers who somehow keep getting hired despite their obvious inadequacies. The recordings captured Sharon describing me as someone so clueless and boring that she couldn't understand how I managed to create valuable innovations in my basement workshop. She expressed genuine confusion about how someone she considered intellectually inferior could develop patents worth millions, apparently believing that contempt for someone automatically negates their professional capabilities. Sharon treated my engineering expertise like some kind of accidental talent that didn't reflect actual intelligence or competence. Her conversations with family members revealed that Sharon viewed our entire marriage as a temporary business arrangement, where I provided financial stability while she waited for better opportunities to present themselves. She discussed our relationship like describing a starter job that served its purpose, but needed to be abandoned once superior options became available. Sharon never expressed any guilt about her deception or concern about destroying someone who had spent 12 years trying to build a life with her. The multiple affair situation created dynamics so twisted that I probably needed professional therapy just to process the scope of betrayal I discovered. Sharon wasn't just unfaithful. She was participating in some kind of family adultery network where everyone shared romantic partners and coordinated their cheating schedules like planning holiday dinner rotations. The women treated affairs like social activities that brought them closer together as a family unit. My conflicted feelings about this situation demonstrate the kind of psychological damage that occurs when someone discovers their entire life has been built on lies told by people who actively despise them. I watched footage of my wife expressing genuine happiness with other people while treating me like an obstacle to her real relationships, which created cognitive dissonance that probably required years of therapy to resolve. I even joked that I would want to participate in the affairs if the family didn't hate me so much, which shows how desperate I was to find some way to make sense of the complete destruction of everything I thought I understood about my marriage. The surveillance evidence revealed that Sharon's feelings toward me went far beyond simple indifference into active contempt and disgust. She discussed me like I was some kind of burden she'd been forced to carry for 12 years, expressing frustration that I continued existing and interfering with her real romantic interests. Sharon treated my presence in our shared house like dealing with an unwanted house guest who'd overstayed their welcome by more than a decade. These recordings would later become the foundation for legal proceedings that would destroy Sharon's entire family financially, while providing me with ironclad evidence of adultery, conspiracy, and attempted theft. The bedroom cameras captured admissions of criminal intent, along with detailed planning discussions that would make prosecution attorneys excited about their conviction chances. The mini payoff of this surveillance operation was discovering that Sharon's true feelings about me were infinitely worse than mere indifference. She actively despised me while pretending to be my wife for financial convenience. But while Sharon and Jim were busy planning their perfect crime, they had no idea that their supposedly clueless victim was already 3 steps ahead of them. The great escape, moving out like a ninja. The beautiful thing about everyone thinking you're completely clueless is that they never see your actual plans coming until it's way too late to stop them. While Sharon and Jim were busy conducting their amateur spy operation and planning to steal millions from his basement workshop, Truck was quietly orchestrating the most methodical disappearance since magicians started making elephants vanish on stage. The man approached his exit strategy with the same systematic precision he used for designing surgical instruments, except instead of creating life-saving medical devices, he was planning the complete destruction of his cheating wife's comfortable lifestyle. Truck's fake camping trip cover story worked perfectly because Sharon had spent years showing zero interest in his outdoor hobbies, which meant she never asked detailed questions about his fishing and hunting activities. The camping cover provided perfect justification for systematically removing tools, equipment, and outdoor gear from their shared house without arousing any suspicion from someone who barely paid attention to his existence anyway. His systematic removal of belongings revealed the harsh reality of what's actually worth taking when a marriage completely disintegrates. Truck focused on tools, outdoor equipment, and personal items that represented his individual interests rather than shared memories of their life together. The man took things that Sharon had never shown interest in anyway, which meant she wouldn't notice their absence until long after he disappeared from her life permanently. Truck probably spent more time organizing his escape than Sharon had spent thinking about their relationship in the past year. What makes this particularly brilliant is that Truck prioritized items based on practical value rather than sentimental attachment, which demonstrates the engineering mindset applied to relationship termination. He took tools that would help him establish his new workshop, camping gear that Sharon considered worthless clutter, and hunting equipment that represented activities she actively discouraged him from pursuing. Truck essentially took everything that made him happy while leaving behind everything that connected him to his miserable marriage. The financial preparation phase shows Truck approaching divorce like a business merger that needed careful asset protection planning. He withdrew funds from his 401k account and established separate financial accounts that Sharon couldn't access or even locate during divorce proceedings. Truck transferred all household bills including phone, electricity, cable, and trash pickup services to Sharon's name, then stopped making payments on everything. The man basically handed Sharon complete financial responsibility for maintaining their shared house while removing his own obligation to support her comfortable lifestyle. This financial strategy creates immediate consequences for Sharon's spending habits while protecting Truck's assets from her inevitable legal attempts to claim community property. Sharon drives a new BMW while Truck drives a 6-year-old pickup truck, which perfectly illustrates how she enjoyed the benefits of his financial stability without contributing equally to their shared expenses. Truck's bill transfer tactic forces Sharon to discover exactly how much their lifestyle actually costs when she has to pay for everything herself. Sharon's complete obliviousness to Truck's preparations demonstrates how little attention she paid to his daily activities and personal interests. The woman was so focused on her affair with Jim and her family's conspiracy planning that she completely missed obvious signs that her husband was preparing to disappear from her life forever. Sharon actually encouraged Truck to organize his belongings and clean up his workspace, apparently believing that helping him get organized would make him a more convenient target for theft and manipulation. The irony reaches peak levels when Sharon enthusiastically supports activities that directly facilitate Truck's escape plan, treating his systematic packing like spring cleaning rather than recognizing it as preparation for permanent departure. She probably offered helpful suggestions about which items he should take camping and which belongings needed better organization, never realizing that her advice was actually helping him steal his own possessions before she could claim them in divorce court. Finding the new rental house required strategic thinking about location, privacy, and workspace requirements that would support Truck's continued pat development while keeping him hidden from Sharon's surveillance efforts. The small rental house in a neighboring town provided sufficient distance from Sharon's family network while maintaining reasonable access to his workplace for final business arrangements. Most importantly, the house included a 2-car garage that would conceal his presence even if Sharon or her family drove by looking for him. The 2-car garage becomes the perfect metaphor for Truck's transformation from passive victim to strategic mastermind, providing secure workspace for his million-dollar surgical tool development while hiding his location from people trying to steal his intellectual property. The garage represents everything Sharon never understood about Truck's capabilities' private space, where he could create valuable innovations without interference from incompetent bosses or cheating wives who treated him like unpaid household help. His final departure on that Saturday morning marks the moment when Truck stops being Sharon's convenient victim and becomes her worst nightmare instead. He informed Sharon about his 2-week camping trip with the same casual tone he used for discussing weekend grocery shopping, never hinting that this departure would be permanent. Truck gathered his remaining belongings, including furniture from the spare bedroom, selected photographs that held personal meaning, and carefully packed everything he wanted to keep from 12 years of marriage. The final act of leaving involved disassembling furniture and removing personal items while leaving behind the surveillance recordings that documented Sharon's adultery, conspiracy planning, and complete contempt for their marriage. Truck basically presented Sharon with a complete archive of her own criminal admissions and betrayal confessions, except she wouldn't discover this evidence until after he disappeared completely from her life. Building suspense around when Sharon would realize Truck's actual departure creates the perfect setup for everything that follows, because the longer she remains oblivious to his absence, the more time he has to implement his revenge strategy without interference. Sharon probably spent several days assuming Truck was enjoying his camping trip while he was actually establishing his new life and preparing to destroy her financial security. She never even noticed I'd left the house for good. What happened next would transform those basement hobby projects into something that made corporate executives question every business decision they'd ever made. The $5 million mic drop. The speed at which Truck sold his surgical tool patents for $5 million within the first week would make business school professors weep with envy over missed opportunities in corporate case studies. Medical device companies recognized immediately what his former employer had completely missed and started bidding against each other for the rights to manufacture trucks' designs, creating exactly the kind of feeding frenzy that his old workplace could have enjoyed if they hadn't been run by people who confused sales management with actual business leadership. The Pat sale process moved with the efficiency of precision engineering, which makes sense considering Truck approached intellectual property negotiations with the same methodical planning he used for everything else in his life. The $5 million price tag probably seemed reasonable to companies that understood how much money hospitals spend on surgical equipment annually, especially when those tools could reduce procedure times and improve surgical precision. Corporate irony reaches peak entertainment value when you realize that Truck's former company rejected innovations worth millions, then watched helplessly as their engineer sold the same innovations to competitors who would use them to dominate market segments. The memo threatening to fire Truck for working on valuable ideas during company time becomes the ultimate symbol of management stupidity that destroys companies from the inside. These corporate executives essentially paid Truck to develop expertise in surgical tool design, then forced him to monetize that expertise independently when they proved too short-sighted to recognize its value. Jim's firing represents karma operating with the swift efficiency of surgical precision, delivering consequences that match the scope of his betrayal perfectly. The same incompetent sales manager who spent months micromanaging an engineer while planning to steal millions in intellectual property suddenly found himself explaining to corporate leadership why their most innovative employee had disappeared along with his valuable patents. That phone call from Jim, explaining my firing, was the cherry on top. Jim probably tried to frame the situation as unavoidable employee turnover rather than admitting his role in driving away their most productive engineer through systematic harassment and attempted theft. Truck's strategic information campaign to competitor companies creates the kind of business revenge that makes corporate executives wake up in cold sweats. He didn't just sell his pats to the highest bidder. He systematically exposed Jim's incompetence, Sharon's workplace affair, and the company's complete failure to recognize valuable innovation when it developed in their own basement workshops. The letters probably detailed every aspect of the patent theft conspiracy along with documentation of Jim's management failures, creating a comprehensive case study in how not to retain talented employees. The competitor company deal with Perry represents everything Jim's management style wasn't employee-friendly leadership that actually values engineering expertise over sales department politics. Perry probably offered Truck the kind of work environment where innovation gets rewarded rather than punished, where engineers can focus on solving technical problems instead of defending themselves against incompetent supervisors. Truck's investment in Perry's company creates this beautiful situation where his former workplace loses their best engineer to a competitor who will use his expertise to destroy them in the marketplace. Building tension around the systematic destruction of Truck's old company feels like watching dominoes fall in perfect sequence, except each domino represents another aspect of Jim and Sharon's comfortable lifestyle collapsing under the weight of their own greed. The company loses their most innovative engineer, faces public exposure of workplace affairs and patent theft conspiracies, and suddenly discovers that their rejection of million-dollar innovations has armed their competitors with weapons that will destroy their market position. Truck transforms from passive victim into puppet master, pulling all the strings that control his enemy's professional destruction, orchestrating their downfall with the same precision he used for designing surgical instruments. The man who everyone treated like unpaid help suddenly becomes the person who determines whether they keep their jobs, maintain their reputations, or retain any financial security. Truck gains the power to rehire employees who showed him loyalty while ensuring that the people who betrayed him face permanent consequences for their actions. The employee rehiring process reveals how workplace loyalty actually operates when employees get treated with respect rather than contempt. Perry's company offers pay raises and improved benefits to people who worked under Jim's toxic management, creating immediate contrast between ethical leadership and the incompetent supervision they'd endured. These employees probably jumped at opportunities to work for someone who values their contributions rather than treating them like disposable resources that exist solely to boost management egos. Public revelation of the surveillance recordings transforms private workplace drama into community-wide scandal that destroys reputations across multiple social networks simultaneously. The recordings get shared with coworkers, friends, church members, and basically everyone who knew Sharon and Jim personally, ensuring that their betrayal becomes public knowledge rather than private shame. Small-town gossip networks spread scandal faster than social media algorithms, which means everyone learns about the affair and patent theft conspiracy within days of the evidence release. Sharon and Jim's growing panic becomes entertainment for everyone who witnessed their arrogant behavior during the conspiracy phase. Watching people who thought they were master criminals discover that their victim was actually collecting evidence of everything they assumed they were hiding. Their confidence transforms into desperation, as they realize that Truck documented their criminal planning with the same thorough attention to detail he applied to surgical tool design. Jim's pathetic attempt to interview at Perry's company demonstrates the kind of delusional confidence that made him think he could steal millions from someone smarter than him. The man who spent months planning patent theft suddenly tries to present himself as a valuable employee to the same company that just hired his victim and learned about his criminal conspiracy. Jim probably walked into that interview assuming his sales experience would overcome public knowledge of his complete ethical failure. The systematic destruction creates cascading consequences that multiply beyond Jim and Sharon's individual punishment to affect their entire support network of family conspirators and workplace enablers. The company faces financial ruin from losing valuable innovations and talented employees, while Sharon's family discovers that their scheme to steal millions has backfired into complete financial devastation. The spectacular success combined with public vindication provides more satisfying revenge than any elaborate punishment scheme, because watching enemies destroy themselves while you prosper delivers justice with mathematical precision. But Sharon's real shock was still coming when she opened those divorce papers expecting to cash in on her husband's newfound millions. Divorce Court Theater, the prenup strikes back. The divorce papers spelled out Sharon's financial future with brutal clarity. The prenuptial agreement stated that cheaters leave with only their premarriage assets, which in Sharon's case meant absolutely nothing except her personal belongings and maybe her BMW if she could keep making the payments. The woman who spent months planning to steal her husband's life work suddenly faced the harsh reality that adultery has consequences, especially when those consequences were spelled out in legal documents her own family insisted on creating. Sharon probably read through those divorce papers 3 times before the math finally computed in her brain. Cheating wives don't get rewarded with millions, they get exactly what the prenup promised them. Sharon's initial reaction to the divorce papers reveals everything you need to know about entitled expectations and how people react when reality destroys their fantasy scenarios. She wasn't devastated about losing her marriage or heartbroken about Truck discovering her affair. She was furious that he had transferred all the household bills to her name and stopped paying for her comfortable lifestyle. Sharon called Truck screaming about electricity bills and cable payments like a tenant complaining to her landlord about utility shutoffs, completely missing the point that divorced people handle their own expenses rather than expecting their ex-husbands to subsidize their adultery. The prenup enforcement process moved through the legal system with the mechanical precision of surgical equipment, which makes sense considering the document was designed by Sharon's own family to protect their daughter from gold-digging husbands who might cheat and steal her money. Legal karma operates with beautiful symmetry when the protective measures you create for yourself become the weapons that destroy your own financial security. Sharon's family probably spent more money on divorce lawyers than they would have saved by just letting her marry Truck without a prenup, which demonstrates how greed and paranoia create their own worst-case scenarios. The recorded evidence presentation transformed divorce court into dinner theater where everyone got to witness Sharon and Jim's criminal conspiracy planning in high-definition audio and video. The recordings didn't just prove adultery, they documented detailed criminal conspiracy discussions that made Sharon's legal team realize they were defending someone who had basically confessed to everything on camera. Sharon's recorded conversations with Jim included specific plans for stealing surgical tool patents, timeline discussions about when to implement their theft strategy, and detailed financial calculations about how they would split millions in stolen intellectual property. These weren't casual conversations about workplace attractions. These were business planning sessions where Sharon provided insider information about her husband's work schedule, security measures, and patent development progress. The woman basically created a documentary film about her own criminal activities, then acted surprised when that evidence got used against her in legal proceedings. Court officials probably hadn't seen documentation this thorough since prosecutors started using surveillance footage to convict organized crime families, except instead of professional criminals, they were watching a cheating wife and incompetent sales manager bumble their way through patent theft like amateur criminals. When those recordings played in court, Sharon's fate was sealed with the finality of a surgical incision. Her lawyers couldn't dispute audio and video evidence of their client planning criminal conspiracy while conducting an extramarital affair, which made the prenup enforcement automatic and undeniable. The judge probably spent more time reviewing the technical quality of the recordings than deliberating about their legal implications, because criminal confessions don't require extensive legal interpretation when they're captured in crystal-clear audio. The public humiliation aspect reached levels that would make reality television producers jealous of the drama and community involvement. Small-town gossip networks operate more efficiently than news organizations when it comes to spreading scandal, which means everyone learned about Sharon's recorded confessions within days of the evidence being presented in court. Church members, co-workers, neighbors, and basically everyone who knew Sharon personally got to hear detailed recordings of her discussing criminal conspiracy and expressing contempt for her husband while planning to steal his millions. Local businesses probably played the recordings during slow periods like they were broadcasting radio entertainment, except instead of fictional drama, they were sharing real-life criminal confessions from people everyone recognized. The recordings spread through social media, workplace break rooms, and community gathering places, until Sharon couldn't show her face anywhere without people recognizing her voice from the criminal conspiracy discussions they'd heard online. The financial ruin of Sharon's entire family demonstrates how criminal conspiracies create cascading consequences that destroy everyone involved rather than just the primary criminals. Jean and Joan lost their house, cars, and financial stability because their participation in the patent theft scheme made them liable for legal costs and damaged their own employment prospects. The family that spent months planning to steal millions ended up losing everything they already owned, which represents justice operating with mathematical precision to balance criminal intentions with appropriate consequences. Sharon's mother and sister faced social ostracism that extended beyond financial penalties into complete community rejection of their behavior. These women couldn't maintain employment, social relationships, or basic community acceptance after their recorded conversations revealed the depth of their conspiracy against Truck's financial security and emotional well-being. The family destroyed their own social standing by underestimating how thoroughly their criminal planning had been documented and how quickly that evidence would spread through their community network. The ultimate irony of this legal disaster is that the prenuptial agreement Sharon's family insisted on creating became the instrument of their complete financial and social destruction, proving that paranoid protective measures often create the conditions for exactly the outcomes they were designed to prevent. Ever seen a prenup backfire like this? Comment below. But Sharon's humiliation wasn't quite finished yet, because sometimes people who think they've lost everything decide they have nothing left to lose by making one final desperate scene in the most public way possible. The final showdown, company party chaos. The Employee Appreciation Day and grand opening event at Perry's new company becomes the perfect stage for the most spectacular public humiliation in small-town West Virginia history. Sharon, Jim, and the entire conspiracy crew show up expecting to witness Truck's continued misery, not realizing they're about to become the main entertainment for everyone who actually matters in their community. Sharon's dramatic entrance reveals everything you need to know about people who confuse arrogance with intelligence and entitlement with actual power. The woman storms into the company event like she owns the place, apparently forgetting that she's unemployed, divorced, and completely broke thanks to her own criminal conspiracy. Sharon carries herself with the same confident swagger she displayed during her affair planning, except now she's directing that energy towards someone who's already destroyed her entire life while she wasn't paying attention. She marches up to Truck and calls him a deceptive person, with the righteous indignation of someone who apparently believes that victims aren't allowed to fight back against people trying to steal their millions. The beautiful irony of Sharon accusing Truck of deception, while standing in a room full of people who have heard recordings of her planning to steal his pets, creates comedy gold that professional comedians couldn't script better. This is the same woman who spent months conducting surveillance operations in her own basement, coordinating patent theft with her boss boyfriend, and discussing her husband like he was unpaid household help. Sharon apparently operates under the delusion that cheating wives are entitled to steal millions from their husbands without facing any consequences for their criminal behavior. The public playing of recorded evidence transforms the company event into the most educational community theater production these people have ever witnessed. Truck presents the surveillance footage with the same methodical precision he uses for engineering presentations, except instead of explaining surgical tool specifications, he's documenting adultery and criminal conspiracy with high-definition audio and video. The recordings play through the sound system like a radio drama, except everyone recognizes the voices of people they know personally discussing plans to steal millions and destroy someone's life for personal profit. These aren't casual conversations about workplace attractions. These are detailed business planning sessions where Sharon provides insider information about security measures, work schedules, and PAT development timelines. The crowd gets to hear Sharon and Jim coordinate their theft strategy like they're planning a surprise birthday party, complete with timeline discussions and profit-sharing calculations. The recordings reveal Sharon expressing genuine contempt for Truck while describing him as someone who exists solely to provide financial support and perform yard maintenance for her real romantic interests. The crowd's reaction creates two unforgettable moments that define small-town justice. First, when Sharon's mother Jean gasps audibly as her own voice plays through the speakers discussing how to kick Truck out and steal his money, her face turns red with the realization that everyone now knows her role in the conspiracy. Second, when Jim's recorded voice admits he doesn't understand the surgical tools but plans to steal them anyway, his former co-workers start laughing at the sheer stupidity of someone trying to steal innovations he couldn't comprehend if his life depended on it. If you loved watching justice served, hit like and subscribe for more crazy tales. Jim's pathetic job interview attempt with Perry's company represents delusion reaching levels that require professional psychological intervention. The same incompetent sales manager who spent months planning to steal millions from his subordinates suddenly tries to present himself as a valuable employee to the company that just hired his victim. Jim walks into this interview apparently believing that his sales experience and management background will overcome public knowledge of his complete ethical failure and criminal conspiracy participation. Jim actually claims he kept the old company running smoothly, which demonstrates the kind of alternative reality thinking that made him believe he could outsmart an engineer in the first place. The man who couldn't understand basic surgical tool concepts suddenly positions himself as essential leadership material for a company that specializes in innovative medical device development. Jim's confidence remains completely intact despite overwhelming evidence that he's professionally incompetent and personally corrupt, which shows how people convince themselves that wanting something badly enough makes them automatically qualified to receive it. Truck's calm, professional response creates perfect contrast to the emotional chaos erupting around him as his enemies realize the scope of their defeat. While Sharon screams accusations and Jim makes desperate interview pitches, Truck maintains the same measured demeanor he uses for engineering presentations. The man who everyone treated like unpaid help suddenly becomes the most powerful person in the room, controlling the flow of information and determining who gets hired by the successful company everyone wants to join. Truck introduces two new design engineers who confirm his role in creating the surgical kits that are generating millions in revenue, which completely undermines Jim's attempts to claim credit for innovations he couldn't understand if his life depended on it. These engineers validate Truck's expertise while exposing Jim's lies about keeping the old company running smoothly. The technical professionals recognize Truck's contributions while dismissing Jim's management claims, which creates public proof of who actually created value versus who just pretended to contribute. The presentation of Jim's own memo, stating that the surgical tools belong to Truck, becomes the final legal nail in the coffin of any remaining theft attempts. This document, written by Jim himself, establishes Truck's ownership of the patents while proving that the company officially rejected the innovations before he developed them independently. Jim's own corporate memo becomes the weapon that destroys his criminal conspiracy and protects Truck's intellectual property rights. The final legal threats delivered by Jim and his associates represent desperate attempts by people who have already lost everything to somehow regain control through intimidation tactics. These empty threats carry about as much power as declaring war on mathematics, because you can't threaten someone with legal action when you've already been caught on recording planning to commit crimes against them. Jim's associates probably charged him thousands of dollars to deliver threats that everyone knows are completely unenforceable. The ultimate revelation is that sometimes the most satisfying revenge involves simply allowing enemies to destroy themselves publicly, while you succeed spectacularly in front of everyone who matters. Truck doesn't need elaborate punishment schemes because Sharon and Jim's own actions created consequences more devastating than any revenge plot he could have planned. Their public humiliation becomes permanent entertainment for a community that will never forget how these criminals tried to steal millions from someone they treated like garbage, proving that intelligence and patience always triumph over arrogance and greed. The complete destruction of Sharon's family proves that greed makes smart people do incredibly stupid things. Sharon and Jim thought they were master criminals planning the perfect theft, when really they were just documenting their own stupidity for legal proceedings. Their arrogance convinced them that treating someone like garbage meant he was too weak to fight back effectively. Sometimes the most devastating revenge involves simply being better than the people who wronged you while letting their own greed create the consequences. Truck didn't need elaborate punishment schemes because criminals always punish themselves through their own actions when they underestimate engineers who approach problems with surgical precision. Drop your workplace drama stories in the comments below. I guarantee none of you have surveillance footage this entertaining.